All set? Okay. Good morning.
Morning.
And thank you all for joining us on this morning. It's really important that we come and speak to you right away. The governor on yesterday appeared on WVON, which is an African-American radio station here in Chicago, and he claimed that he had done some historic things for the black community. And I would agree that they were historic, but they were from a negative component. He decimated many of our programs, and he caused a lot of havoc. There's nothing good to say that the governor has done on behalf of the black community. So we stand here today to set the record straight on the governor's policy proposals and his nearly 800-day budget impasse, and how devastating that was to the black communities in the state of Illinois. My colleagues are here today, and they will offer some brief remarks on some of the specific programs that affect the black community that the governor affected. I just want to, in a nutshell, speak to the Chicago public school system and how the governor used that system as a pawn throughout negotiations for education funding. In fact, the governor was pitting children against children, school districts against school districts across the state. Had not the rank and file members come up with an education funding formula plan, then we would not have a sound new education program that really had little to zero to do with the governor. In fact, he vetoed it, and Representative Will Davis, who was the House sponsor of that bill, will share information as it relates to that a little further. First, I'd like to bring up, and I didn't introduce myself, I'm Senator Kimberly Lightford, Assistant Majority Leader, Chairman of the Black Caucus. And I'd like to introduce Senator Toy Hutchinson, who is the Senate Chairman of the Black Caucus and also the Chairman of Senate Revenue.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Toy Hutchinson. Toy Hutchinson, 40th District Chair of the Senate Revenue Committee, and also Chair, as Leader Lightford just said, of the Senate Black Caucus. We stand here today to make sure that people know what the truth is. The comments were largely framed by the governor around help for black business and how it was historic. I'm not necessarily sure how one executive order rises to the level of historic when actions are more important than words on a piece of paper, and legislative enforcement of things that we've actually passed is more a measure of actually doing something to move the ball forward for the black community. We also want to make sure, and you'll hear this from a number of us, that we're not interested in pitting the needs of black business or social services against each other, because the very real needs of the African American community are expansive of both. We need it on both sides. We need access to jobs and education. We need contracting opportunities. We need violence prevention. We need higher education. We need all those things that any healthy society, any healthy group across the board needs all of. So when the question comes, historically being the best that we've ever had, when you look at the full scheme, when you look at the full record, it tells a very, very different story. And on that front, it's heartbreaking, because we see what people are dealing with on a regular basis, and we lived through a historic budget impasse that created so much havoc and so much devastation across the board. One example in particular was the child care program. Now, many of us will argue that the child care program, we argued about the safety and the needs of those children who were part of the child care assistance program, which is a joint federal-state program to make sure that working families have access to high-quality child care. What happened was, under the cover of darkness, the governor slashed that program, creating a problem that sent 90% of the children that were eligible off the program. 90% of the kids that were eligible were cut from that program in one sweep of a pen. It took us 2.5 years to slowly bring that program back to its capacity. We're continuing to work on those things. Now, that's the side of the kids. We didn't get very much coverage in the media about what it did to those black businesses who were primarily owned by a lot of African American women who were forced to shut their doors. So child care centers who are anchors in communities, anchors in neighborhoods, no different than when a school closes, when a child care center closes, and you had parents having to choose between quitting their jobs and knowing where their children would be. Now, I know that this rings kind of ironic considering the national conversation right now. But it happened here in Illinois with African American children all across the state. And I don't know how you argue that what we do for our smallest, while we're raising them to be exactly what we want them to be, grow up and be fully productive members of the community, and we told parents to do everything we told them to do, go to work or go to school, and we will help you with childcare, so one day you won't need that. All of that fell on deaf ears. There were budgetary arguments made. There were straight up numbers on a spreadsheet thrown about and bounded about to make it seem as though we had more concerns with fraud and waste than we did with protecting our children and encouraging our parents to work and go to school so that their families would remain intact and whole. On top of that, we know that when we restrict government spending, there's an economic multiplier that happens in our neighborhoods. All of those small businesses have contracts. They buy things in the neighborhood. We talk all the time in the Black Caucus about how if I can't afford to go out to eat, then you don't need to hire more waitresses at a restaurant. If I can't afford to go to the movies, then you don't need to hire another ticket taker at the movies. So whenever we see working class people across the city, many of them, and across the state, many of them, working class folks that are inclusive of who we represent, losing their access to losing their access to services, losing their access to contracting opportunities, losing their access to higher education, losing their access, and then hear with a straight face and a little laugh that I've been better than anybody else in the history of the state. I said at first that I didn't have words for that. Unfortunately, we do have words for that because the Black Caucus has been working diligently every single day through the budget impasse, and then what we were able to accomplish in this last budget to change that story and to change that trajectory. So we're here to talk more about that. One example I said was when you make a human service argument as though that's something different than a business or an economic development argument, there's nothing that exists in silos. One cannot exist with the other. There were businesses all across the state that were forced to close. And unfortunately, you don't have to appropriate for things that don't exist anymore, which is probably the most heartbreaking thing of all. So with that, I'd like to bring up my colleague, the chair of the House Legislative Black Caucus, Representative Camille Lilly.
Thank you, Representative Hutchison and Representative Lightford. Statement.
Me?
I got it. I'm actually saddened and distraught a little bit today to be here today to talk about this matter, but thank you, Senators. When it comes to helping people, it requires us to stand together and work together as we're doing today. We are better together. Unfortunately, the statement that was made on the other day by the governor had no sense of togetherness in it. It had all of the eyes. And unfortunately, the eyes happen to reflect the fake news that we get out of Washington, D.C. It is not correct that he has done things, particularly in the district that I represent, to help the African American community. He has hurt. When you remove resources that address their health care needs, you have hurt their opportunity to be viable citizens here in the state. When you talk to human services organization and behavioral health services organization who are servicing the Black community and they have closed their doors, over 900 individuals who were receiving care for substance abuse no longer receive that care. When behavioral health institutions who provide mental health services and counseling and social trauma services, they have closed their doors under his watch. And that's because he's not working together with the Legislative Black Caucus and the General Assembly at large. When you have an impasse of a budget that's constitutionally sound to put a budget in place and you don't sign a budget? Until when did he sign that budget?
The other day.
The other day? When you have thousands of individuals, citizens that we represent come to our offices as if we got the pen to sign the checks. We don't. it is important that if the governor thought he could help our communities, he has the most jobs in all the agencies within the government where he can employ citizens in the black community. In the public health, public safety approach committee alone, the agency that we had the opportunity to review, 95% of them had less than 10% of African Americans working in those agencies. Where he could have an impact, because that's economics, giving a person a job, and these are the type of jobs that African Americans can do. Black people can do. It is important that where he could help, he did not. There's hardly any African Americans, black people working in the state government. So wherever he helped in his mind, it was not in the African American community. Our health has deteriorated. The disparities in healthcare has widened. When our life expectancies in the communities that I represent is 20 years less than citizens of Illinois and other communities, we have a problem. And I'm saying we. And that's why we stand together. If you don't have your health, you don't have much else. And when you cut continuously healthcare services, human service to people who need the most, you're not helping them, you're hurting them. I could go on, but there's other people who want to share their perspective. Young people, old people, that was indeed fake news.
Thank you, Representative Lilly, Chairman of the House Back Caucus. And so you just heard a little bit from leadership of our caucus on the challenges that we've had in getting a message through to the governor, trying to meet the governor where he was at on all of our priorities, all of our issues have fallen on deaf ears for the last 3 years. All of what he said are totally false claims, a lot of misleading comments, and just downright lies. I would like for Representative Welch to share with you the devastation he's caused on our higher education system in keeping young African Americans from attending community colleges.
Thank you, Senator Lightford. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Chris Welch, and I am the chair of the House Higher Education Committee. And I am here with my colleagues this morning because this is a very important topic that had to be responded to. I changed my schedule around this morning with some events in the district in order to be here to make sure the record is clear. One thing we know is that Governor Rauner has failed us. Bruce Rauner is a failure. Bruce Rauner's record is clear. And the record clearly indicates that under his watch, unemployment rate among black people is at an all-time high. And do you know how we address the unemployment rate in this state? By giving us an education and giving us a job. Bruce Rauner has failed us in both of those regards. Under his watch, he has disinvested in our education system, vastly disinvested in our education system. And we know in our communities, the communities that we represent, that education is everything, and it is our way out. For nearly 800 days under Bruce Rauner's man-made, created budget impasse, Illinois operated without a budget. Many low-income and first-time college students who rely on MAP grants left our state because of Bruce Rauner. And most of those students looked like the people behind me. 72,000 students went somewhere else since Bruce Rauner became governor. That's a loss of 7,500 jobs in our higher education system. From 2015 to 2016, many campuses faced significant decreases in freshman class enrollment. Let's look around the state. Eastern Illinois, 25.2% decline in their student population just since Bruce Rauner became our governor. Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, anyone been there lately? 23.7% decline since Bruce Rauner became our governor. Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, 20.2%. Chicago State has lost nearly half of its enrollment since 2010. And in 2016, well into Bruce Rauner's governorship, they had 86 freshmen enrolled at a state university. Bruce Rauner has failed us. And what does he do? On Juneteenth, nonetheless, he talks about all the great things he's done for black people. He is a failure. And we should not let him get away with it. We need to make sure the people of this state know Bruce Rauner's record, and it's a record of failure. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Welch. And while we're on education, let's just stay here for a moment, because he's taunting himself as the reform governor for education. He's put more money in education than any other governor. Just simply not true facts, another falsehood. Representative Will Davis was the chief sponsor of our education reform bill. I worked alongside Senator Bernard in the Senate, and this governor was not in support of our initiative until the very last hour, and Representative Davis can share that in further detail.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, my colleagues behind me. I am Will Davis. I'm state representative of the 30th District out in the South Suburbs. And as the chairwoman mentioned, I was the House sponsor of Senate Bill 1947, which was the education funding reform bill. It was an effort to try to make sure that we did things the right way in terms of educating our children, or providing the resources to educating our children, to make sure that not only historic dollars were put forward, but also create a mechanism that allowed for those districts that needed the money more than others, that they were put at the front of the line and would get those dollars before some of our richer schools. As the senator mentioned, unfortunately, Governor Rauner's actions toward the school funding bill did not speak toward him saying that he could be the education governor. Unfortunately, he initially vetoed the education bill, and only until there was a tax credit put in for a lot of his friends who are wealthy donors to help private and parochial schools did he come around and say, yes, we need to move that bill forward. And then not only in terms of putting the money for, which at this caucus fought for to make sure that we had the initial $350 million investment, he's been touting the need to shift various costs back to school districts. So it ultimately becomes a net loss to school districts when you put money in, but then say, here's some additional costs that you need to pick up. That is the antithesis of it, and actually could result in some districts making decisions in order to try to raise property taxes in order to help cover the additional costs that have been that could be put on them by the governor. So again, when you think about the idea of trying to move education forward, Representative Welch talked about the need to support education. We have to give these young people the foundation necessary in order for them to move into the higher education system. So it all works together. And ladies and gentlemen, this is about looking at the record. Again, when you go without passing a budget for 2.5 years, there's no way you can say that you've helped anybody in a situation like that, particularly African-American, the African-American communities. Again, childcare, businesses closed. We saw the devastating impact of not having those opportunities. And it has trickled over into everything else that these members are going to talk about in higher education and minority contracting. But in K through 12, we saw, you know, a fight where it should have been a lot of coming together, because we wanted to make sure that we were helping children throughout the entire state of Illinois, particularly African-American children. We saw a fight on our hands with the governor, again, that ultimately resulted in him initially vetoing the education funding bill, not wanting to support it until a tax credit was put in for wealthy donors. So again, when you talk about the impact on the community, if we aren't providing those dollars for our children to be able to be educated, and I've got a 6-year-old, and I think about that all the time, and think about the impact of what I do on her life. If we couldn't make sure that her school district had the resources necessary, who knows where a lot of these young people will indeed wind up. And again, we talk about the continuum of child care to education to job opportunities to entrepreneurship. It all works together. And if we are failing in one area, it's going to have a devastating impact on any of the other areas that we're going to also talk about this morning. So again, we saw his disengagement on K through 12 early on in that. And now though we've passed the budget and we put the resources in, all of a sudden he did it all. And then let me just add one more thing about that, early childhood education. Some of the dollars for early childhood come out of the K through 12 budget. In his initial budget, we needed to put in $50 million for early childhood education. In his initial budget, that any of you can go and take a look at, he only wanted to put in $10 million. This caucus had to fight to make sure that we put the additional $40 million in for early childhood education. So how can he have done more for our community when he didn't even want to make the right investment in early childhood education that flows into the child care assistance program that we talked about earlier? Unfortunately, we just see it's all visible and we see the impact, or can see the impact of what he's done, but it's all on the record. You can go back and take a look at what has happened to our communities as a result of his failed policies, his approach to slashing, his approach to cutting, and his approach to not wanting to invest. And I'll come back a little later and talk about contracting.
Thanks, Representative, because he wanted to sugarcoat the early childhood piece after he devastated and his own wife had to sue him with all of the others. He wanted to sugarcoat that. He initially wanted $10 million. We worked to get it to the $50 million that we had done previously over the years, and he put an extra $25 million on top of it. Probably took it from HIV funds or took it from mental health funds or helping children with autism or disability, because he slashed all of those programs and hugely slashed domestic violence for women programs. So I want to bring Representative Mitchell up because as the Black Caucus approach you, we're not just approaching you just from the city of Chicago, we're approaching you from all across the state of Illinois. We have members in East St. Louis and Waukegan, North Chicago, Champaign-Urbana. We represent Rockford. We're on the south side, the west side, the south suburbs, the west side. Black people are all over this state, Governor. We're here. And so I would like Christian Mitchell to talk about the impact of violence. When you don't have these programs in place, how violence is alarming rates across the state and hugely in the city of Chicago.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to everyone for coming out this morning. I don't think anyone, as Christian Mitchell said, represented 26th District. I don't think that anyone up here, or probably anyone who's paid attention, was shocked that Governor Rauner would get on the radio and lie. I think if you don't think that this administration lies, then you should ask the veterans at Quincy. But I would say that I think we were a little bit stunned that he would do so about black folks on Juneteenth. So I would just want to talk briefly about the case that the governor has made, because he was trying to make the case he was doing good for black people, and I want to outline the case that he's made. When you look around the state of Illinois and you see that under Governor Rauner, black unemployment is at its highest rate in the country, you've made a case. When you look around the state and you see that you have not just devastated child care, which hurts black children, but has destroyed hundreds of African American small businesses, you've made a case. When you look around the state and you see that the governor cut ceasefire and that shootings spiked, putting more black and brown children in the hospital and in the morgue, you've made a case. When you see that you claim you care about black folks, but you tried to reinstitute the death penalty, which disproportionately harms people who look like me and the people standing behind me, you're making a case. When your cabinet looks like a Trump family photo, you're making a case. But the case that Bruce Rauner has made is that he is Illinois' own homegrown Donald Trump, that he is just as delusional, that he has been just as devastating to the middle class generally and to black folks specifically. That is the case that Governor Rauner has made, and if you don't believe it, all you have to do is look at his record. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Wow. We need to talk a little bit more and dive into youth employment rates. When our African American males in Chicago and across the state are unemployed, uneducated, no skills, and not much to offer by this governor administration, I'd like for our youngest member of the Black Caucus to talk about the impacts on youth employment.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and the entire Black Caucus. And we say Black Caucus, we're talking about our city council leaders, we're talking about our Springfield leaders, and all of the leaders and African Americans all over the state. We adamantly reject the lies that were spewed on WVON. WVON is in my community. WVON right on 87th Street in Avalon Park in the Calumet Heights community, right next to Chatham, the heart of the African American community in the South Side. And for the governor to come over and spew these just ridiculous lies was hurtful. But it's been a hurtful 4 years, and hopefully in January that'll come to an end. Governor Rauner has been bad for the entire state of Illinois. He's been bad for white, black, Latino, and everybody. But he's been specifically bad for African Americans, but clearly we're disproportionately affected. When we talk about black business, what is a black business? It's usually a professional. But what is before the professional? It's an educated African American. It's a person with a particular skill set. And how do you get those skill sets? Through education. And you have to start the youth section. And right now, Governor Rauner has sent a message that he doesn't care about black youth. He doesn't care about the safety of black youth, which has just been detailed by Representative Christian Mitchell. And again, I'm Marcus Evans, State Representative of 33rd District. But Governor Rauner doesn't care about employing young people so they can be in productive activity. More than nearly 2,000 youth in Illinois, 16 to 24, were out of school and jobless in 2015. It's clearly disproportionate in the African American community. And just as a fact, again, not my opinion, we're laying out facts. Governor Rauner proposed cutting youth employment and after-school programs in his budgets, and he's done that continually, but not this year, of course, because you know elections coming up in November. But he's continually cut these programs, sending a message to African-American youth that we not only don't want you to be black business, we don't even want you to be productive. We want you to be in prison, and to give you an extra caveat, I'll bring back the death penalty. So after I imprison you, we'll send you to the morgue. I think the message is being sent. Don't believe the lies. Don't believe the innuendo. Governor Rauner is not a friend of Illinois, not a friend of white Illinois. He's not a friend of Latino Illinois. And he's most certainly not a friend of black Illinois. We need a governor. We need just an individual in office like the Black Caucus that are pushing for us. We've sent bills to Governor Rauner over the years to help African Americans. I think Camille Lilly has mentioned, I'm also a member of the Public Safety Appropriations, that the employment is not there. So clearly the business acumen is not there. So I'm disappointed in the governor's remarks. Again, I adamantly reject this remarks. You're not helping black businesses. You're not helping any businesses, and we'd like you to bow gracefully this fall. So thank you, and please let's move forward.
Thank you, Representative Evans. So the governor spoke specifically to minority contracts yesterday, and so it's important that we speak specifically to minority contracts. And I'd like to invite Representative Will Davis back for that discussion.
So a couple of years ago, we passed a bill to create a task force specifically to look at African American businesses, and